All right then, listener. Are you ready for this? We're diving deep into medieval Britain today. Big castles, bigger battles, and a whole lot of drama.
You weren't kidding about the drama, were you? Just looking at these sources, we've got power struggles galore.
Oh, we're talking church versus crown, the rise of Parliament, and England throwing its weight around with its neighbors. It's going to be a wild ride.
Buckle up, everyone, because once we untangle these threads of history, we'll see just how much of it still affects us today.
It's amazing how these echoes of the past resonate in the present, isn't it? But let's not get ahead of ourselves. First things first. 1066, the Normans are here, and William the Conqueror's got that shiny new crown on his head. You'd think that's game over, right?
You'd think, wouldn't you? But here's the thing about power. Someone's always vying for it. William might be king, but even he's got someone looking over his shoulder. The Pope.
Ah, right, the Pope. Back then, claiming authority over all Christian kings was a power move and a half.
It was a game changer, really. Control the church, and you control who gets to be bishop. And these bishops, they weren't just about prayer. They were major landowners, tax collectors, and wielded serious influence.
Talk about a power struggle right out the gate. And didn't things really heat up with William Rufus, the son?
Yeah.
He wasn't one to back down from a fight, especially with the church.
Oh, William Rufus. Now there was a king who liked to push buttons. He and Archbishop Anselm, they locked horns constantly. Rufus wanted the church's wealth, and Anselm, well, he stood his ground for the church's independence.
But even that clash pales in comparison to Henry II and Thomas Becket. I mean, talk about your falling outs. That one's legendary.
Legendary and tragic. Henry and Becket were close, you see, until Henry decided to put the church in its place. Becket, as Archbishop of Canterbury, well, he refused to back down.
And it cost him his life, didn't it? Murdered right there in Canterbury Cathedral. I mean, what a statement.
A statement that completely backfired on Henry. It wasn't just murder, it was sacrilege, and public opinion swung completely against the king. It showed that raw power wasn't enough, especially when pitted against the church's moral authority.
Talk about a miscalculation. It seems the crown learned its lesson about pushing the church too far. So who really came out on top in this tug of war?
It's less about a clear winner and more about finding a balance, an uneasy one at that. The church in England kept some independence, like appointing its own bishops. But those bishops now swore allegiance to the king. A compromise, but one where the tensions simmered beneath the surface.
Speaking of simmering tensions, let's talk about a certain document King John was forced to sign, Magna Carta. I imagine that must have been an awkward day at the royal court.
You could say that again. King John, bless his heart, wasn't exactly known for his tact or good judgment. So in 1215, when his own nobles had had enough, they forced him to sign Magna Carta. It was mostly about their rights, sure, but it established a colossal principle.
Which?
No one, not even the king, is above the law. That idea, revolutionary for its time, planted the seeds for what we now know as Parliament.
Now that's fascinating. So we go from a council of nobles advising the king to, well, how do we get to a parliament where everyday people have a say? That's quite a leap.
And a fascinating one, too. Enter Simon de Montfort, a nobleman who decided to shake things up. In 1265, he leads this rebellion against the king and creates a parliament that includes not just the usual suspects, the nobles, the clergy, but also knights and burgesses representing the towns.
Hold on. You're telling me regular, everyday folk, they had a seat at the table of power. That's incredible. It really is.
Absolutely groundbreaking. De Montfort's parliament might have been short-lived, but its impact, monumental. Fast forward to Edward I, we get the House of Commons, representing the gentry and merchants. It's the first real taste of what we now call no taxation without representation.
And that's a concept that still gets people fired up today.
It's amazing, these stories. They're not just dusty old history. They're still so relevant. But we've got one last stop on our medieval tour today, England. And it's, let's just be friends. Relationship with its neighbors, the Welsh, the Irish, and the Scots.
Yes. Because who doesn't love a good neighborly dispute that lasts for centuries?
Let's start with Wales. They bore the brunt of English ambition pretty heavily, didn't they?
They did. We're talking full-on conquest, imposing castles on the landscape, and eventually becoming directly ruled by the English crown. It was assimilation through, shall we say, forceful encouragement.
And what about Ireland? I'm guessing it's not a simple story.
Ireland's story is complex, a mixture of conquest and resistance. Norman lords carved out their own little kingdoms, backed by the English crown. But unlike Wales, English control never quite reached every corner.
So there's pushback from the Irish. Oh, absolutely. Irish lords and kings, they resisted fiercely. creating a much more fragmented and contested landscape. English kings might have claimed sovereignty, but the Irish were never fully subdued.
And of course, there's Scotland, the land of bagpipes, kilts, and tales of unwavering defiance against English rule.
You can practically hear the bagpipes now. And Scotland's story is full of iconic figures of resistance. William Wallace, Robert Bruce, names that still echo with the spirit of fighting for freedom.
The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, that was a defining moment for Scotland, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was a decisive victory against the odds and cemented Scotland's ability to stand toe-to-toe with England. It proved that their spirit, their unity, wouldn't be easily broken.
It's about more than just land and borders, isn't it? It's about the forging of national identities, a refusal to be just another part of England.
Precisely. These weren't just wars for territory, they were struggles for the very soul of a nation. They're about the stories people tell themselves about who they are and what they're willing to fight for.
It's incredible how those stories, those struggles from centuries ago, they still resonate, they still hold meaning for us today.
And that's the beauty of studying history, isn't it? It's not just dates and names, it's the story of us. The battles might have changed, but the human desire for power, for freedom, for self-determination, that's something that echoes through every era.
From the Pope calling the shots to the birth of no taxation without representation, what a whirlwind tour of medieval British history.
We've covered centuries in a matter of minutes, but hopefully this deep dive will spark some deeper reflection. Look around, look at the world today, and ask yourself how much of what we see, how much of how our own world works, is shaped by the echoes of these medieval power struggles.
An excellent question to ponder. And on that note, we've reached the end of our journey for today. Listener, thank you for joining us. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those history brains buzzing.